When I was 6 years old, I was thrown out of my own birthday party. We'd been playing pin the tail on the donkey, and I had lost, and I had a temper tantrum. And so my mother whisked me down the hall and gave me a good talking to in the bedroom and a little bit of a swat to try to help me get back into things. Perhaps it's the weeping and gnashing of teeth that I did that day that makes me think of this story when I read about the gentleman who shows up at the wedding feast without the wedding robe. The wedding robes were the expected garment at these celebrations. Whether borrowed or owned, you had to wear one. His flagrant disrespect for the occasion deeply offends the king, who banishes him to outer darkness. And Jesus ends with these ominous words: "Many are called, but few are chosen." I don't know about you, but these words seem kind of un-Jesus-y to me. The Jesus I know invited all kinds of people to follow him. He chose 12 disciples, but he welcomed many more in the crowds. He reached out regularly across religious, ethnic, and gender lines. The Jesus I know seems like the fulfillment of Isaiah's words from our first lesson today. "I will make a feast for all peoples." Furthermore, the king in Jesus' parables often represents God. But this king is vengeful and violent. Whatever happened to "for God so loved the world"? A closer read of this parable suggests something else. First thing to know, this is a parable of great exaggeration. Here, honored guests rearrange their proverbial sock drawers instead of coming to the banquet, and then kill the messengers who invite them. The king retaliates by wiping out an entire town. Like many tall tales, Jesus' parables are not to be taken literally, but they are stretched to make a point. And the point he's trying to make has a particular audience, which is the second thing you need to know. The audience are the Pharisees and the temple leaders who are even now at this point in the story coalescing and plotting to get rid of Jesus. They had heard Jesus' message and they rejected it. And so, the townspeople that Jesus speaks about, who kill the messengers, is a not-so-veiled reference to these religious leaders and their misintent against Jesus. On the whole, it seems to me this parable is less about who is chosen and more about what people choose to do. It seems like it would have been more apt for Jesus to say, "Many are called, but few choose to come." In this sense, this parable has a very contemporary feel. Jesus came offering a banquet where everyone is included, where no one is lonely or left out, where everyone has hope of a better tomorrow. It's a vision of life with a capital L, abundant life. But we, along with many others, often fail to recognize the gift of this feast. We fill our lives with activities, crowding out the quiet reflection that worship provides. We focus on doing rather than simply being in God's presence. We take this feast of justice and forgiveness and fullness of life for granted. Jesus calls out this neglect for what it truly is, a rejection of God's invitation to life. We've had some pretty extreme examples this week. of people abandoning God's invitation to life and choosing death instead. Of course, I'm talking about the news we have received in the past week in Israel and Gaza, and attacks that have singled out innocent civilians. Given this parable, I think it's important to be clear that Jesus himself, when faced with violence, did not respond in kind, but rather used his life as a means of nonviolent resistance. Likewise, we cannot stand silent while innocent Israeli and Palestinian people die or look for bloodthirsty revenge. As people of faith, we must speak out against oppression and violence against the innocent and hold ourselves and other people of faith to the vision of Isaiah, of the holy mountain that draws all people of all nations to sit at God's feast in peace. This is also the week in which we stood before City Council and argued our concerns regarding the Sheets development next door. As speaker after speaker rose to give testimony, I thought about all the advantages we have as a church. The advantages of having an educated congregation who can do research, who can stand up and speak compellingly about the issues, who are strong leaders. The gift of pro bono legal support. Connections in the community. These are assets we have. And no matter what the city council decides, it was clear to me that they were listening. And then I thought about how many communities don't have those assets. Communities in which people are forced to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet and don't have time to go to a city council meeting, who don't have lawyers in their community or connections with city leaders, or a city council who cares enough to listen. They are the ones who get the landfills and the highways in their towns. And that's not the feast that God calls us to either. As people of faith, we must hold up God's vision of life for all people, whether we're speaking about situations across the globe or in our own backyard. To me, today's parable is not just a cautionary tale about rejection. It's also a story about invitation. Today, we're the ones who show up. We're here at the King's feast, and we know what it means to hear the words, "You are forgiven." We know the gift of being included and fed. We know what it means to work together, to house the homeless and feed others, and to care for the vulnerable in our own midst. And so I say, let us not take this invitation or this community and its gifts for granted. Let us use our voices and our prayer to cry out for peace and justice around the world. And let us do what we can right here at home to live out that vision of inclusion and peace. Let's use what we are learning in the process of standing up for our ministries and our neighbors. Let's use our growing connections with the Village South neighborhood and the Villager apartments. Let us be like the slaves in this parable who go out into the streets and invite other people to this feast of God's mercy. Let's revel in the pleasure of new friends and neighbors and celebrate what God is doing when God unites strangers and builds peace. We are first and foremost people of faith, and we hold up God's vision of life for all people. Whether your ministry is opening up your trunk at the harvest party, or sponsoring our youth who is going to the gathering, or feeding a homeless family with Family Promise, or simply soaking up that word of forgiveness in this place. Let us all make Epiphany, this church, a true reflection of God's vision of life with a capital L. Let Epiphany be a place that draws all kinds of people to feast on God's grace and acceptance, and to grow to be a stronger, more caring community. Let us choose to come to God's banquet, and let us choose also to share it. Amen.